Hey guys, and welcome back to another breakdown. Tonight we're going to go over the Bad Batch, episode 10. So in this one, of course, we're picking up from the previous week's episode of episode 9, where they're stranded on this planet now and Sid kind of refused to help them out. So the Bad Batch try to work on their transponders when Omega comes up with an ingenious idea to track Gonk in order to track the ship because, well, they can't track the ship anymore. So while they work on that, we see the Marauder flying through the skies as a young boy named Benny lands in a big crater. He brings the Bad Batch's ship to this slaver named Mako, who's kind of seems like a worse version of Watto. He inspects the ship and surmises that this isn't a miner's ship. It's too good to be one, and the people who it belonged to will probably be high profile and not worth the trouble. So they decide to dismantle it and sell the parts. It would seem Mako is a slaver like Watto, and he's lying to all the workers, telling them to find parts and things to steal so that they can sell it for food and rations, keeping them on very little food and water, rationed depending on how well they perform with their digs and finds. All the while, of course, he has an abundance of food that he eats and drinks, and of course, an abundance of Ipsium, which they're mining for, that he's told them is very scarce on the mountain. The Bad Batch find Gonk and meet the Benny kid with him. We get a line that harkens to the Clone Wars and Plo Koon when Benny says, "What do you care about that thing?" referring to Gonk. He's just a beat-up old battery. And Omega steps forward and says, "Not to us." So this was, of course, when the clones were hanging off into space about to die, and they were telling Plo Koon to let them go, that they're expendable. Plo Koon tells them, "Not to me," and saves them. It shows a nice duality between the first Phase 1 clones thinking they're expendable, and now Omega, also a clone, speaking against the expendability of a droid, which the clones fought against. There's a lot of poetry in there, and it was a nice, cool scene. They devise a plan to steal the ship back from Mako. So they enter the facility and Hunter eliminates the droid sentry and lets the rest of the crew down and in. Tech exclaims the conditions of this mine are not up to par, and clearly, of course, as it's a slaver mine. The conditions are as low as can be, as the ones running it really don't care. They finally make it to the Marauder, and Benny tells them about the ray shield in the central tower. So they split up, and the Bad Batch rebuild the taken apart ship as Benny and Omega head to the tower. Mako is seen eating tons of food, clearly eating all the rations for himself and lying to his workers, who are really his slaves. Omega and Benny wait for Mako to come to the cafeteria area, where he awards someone else a soup and gives one bowl to everyone else to fight over like dogs. Omega and Benny leave to the tower to deactivate the shields as she tells him that no one would have to compete for food. So Benny is under the impression that Mako is a good guy and he's doing his best for everyone and cares about everyone, but of course, this couldn't be further from the truth. I honestly think Watto is probably a better guy than this Mako dude, and of course that's saying a lot, because they're both scummy beings. So at this point, Omega gives Benny her last piece of food, and again, this is a very typical Omega move. This shows her compassion for even the thief who put them in this situation after stealing their home, the Marauder. They have a bit of a heart-to-heart together, and he still ends up betraying her and signaling Mako to capture her by previously pressing a button on the commands. Wrecker, Hunter, and Tech get discovered by some miners. Benny learns from Omega that Mako is lying about the mines. It's actually full of Ipsium, and they have no need to ration food and live the way they do. Benny gives up the Bad Batch's location in the garage as well. He's just overall very disillusioned, kind of a scummy guy at this point, and he's just doing what he can to feed himself and be loyal to Mako. Even though, of course, they know that they're stealing things from people. Mako leaves, and we're nearing the end of the episode where he gets stopped on the suspension bridge over lava by the Bad Batch, as Mako's droids hold Omega over the railings, threatening to throw her over. Benny exposes Mako for lying to all of his miners as they finally see the evidence and they all turn on him. The Bad Batch blast the droids, leaving Mako to fend for himself against the miners. He falls over the bridge as his hand grips on, where Benny reaches over and says, "Take my hand," showing another example of forgiveness even to the darkest of people after he found out that he had betrayed him, as Mako eventually falls to his doom. Omega and the Bad Batch get their ship as she says goodbye to Benny. They're all excited to mine a big amount of Ipsium and share all the profits amongst themselves now. They seem pretty happy. Omega learns that the Empire isn't the only threat, as Tech says, "Yes, but there are many out there like us too." So this drives home the fact that, yeah, there are many scummy, evil people out there, but there are also just as many good, kind-hearted people too. So in a way, it's kind of like the prophecy. It's just balance. When there is good, there is bad, and bad, there is good. It's like yin and yang. I found this episode to be very unimportant in terms of character development. There were a few moments, but it really just drove home the fact that Omega is a very pure-hearted person and just a very young child who doesn't really understand certain things and feels that she has to help every single person out there. Maybe a bit of a hero complex, or overdoing it on the fact that she really shouldn't be helping people that have stolen from them and taken away their home. Maybe it's best to hold off and let them prove themselves a little bit more. Perhaps splitting the last ration would have been a little more understandable, but then again, she's a very pure-hearted person, and I think she sees the best in everyone, and that's a very Ahsoka quality. Or should I say, a young Ahsoka quality. Overall, the episode was sort of unimportant. You didn't really need to see this one in order to understand the further episodes. I think next episode hopefully could be a Crosshair one, as we really haven't seen him this entire season, except for like once. I'm also wondering what happened to Cody. I hope they don't turn him into a Shadow Trooper or something like that. Going forward, I'd really appreciate it if they start focusing on more important episodes than just these typical, get into trouble, lose the ship, or get away from the ship, get stuck somewhere, figure it out narrowly, and then get back to the ship, and off they go. I think those episodes are, sure, important for some character development, but at the same time, they get to be a little bit run on, and you don't need as many of them as I think we're getting. Anyways, hopefully next week's episode is going to be a little more exciting. I hope you all enjoyed my breakdown and enjoyed this week's episode regardless. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Find me on Twitter at RealSWTheory, and of course on Instagram and TikTok. I'll see you all in the next episode. And until then, my fellow Jedi and Sith friends, the Force will be with you always.
Fulfill your destiny.